few World War II headlines. I mentioned it last weekend. Was World War II weekend at Reading Airport. I hope a lot of you went there. It really is a spectacular show. Every year, the first weekend in June. If you didn't go this year, plan to go next year. A 3-day event, all kinds of World War II aircraft, reenactors, just flea market and just general interest stuff. So please keep that in mind for next year. And several of our previous speakers were there, as is Richard Boyd at the tables, being interviewed by any number of people, signing signatures, and it's a wonderful tribute to the World War II vets. It's also a wonderful opportunity to see an awful lot about, learn a lot about World War II. Okay, gosh, where this is? Yesterday, June 6, 1944, 74 years ago, the invasion of Western Europe, and we've talked about that an awful lot. And coincidentally, our friend Chuck Klein, who was a speaker here, was interviewed yesterday by CBS 21 Evening News. He was on at 5 and 6 o'clock. I wish we'd gotten notice early enough that we could have sent an email blast out to everybody. He did a terrific job. Charlie and I were there while he was being interviewed. They asked some great questions. He was just very candid and a lot of fun and enjoyed it. But unfortunately, they take his 45 or 50 minutes of chat and compress it into 35 very important seconds. But nonetheless, it showed you the character of the character, and it was a lot of fun. D-Day was 74 years ago, but you know, we've been in the war already for quite a while, since December 8, 1941, obviously, in Pearl Harbor. November 1942 in Morocco, in Operation Torch. July of 43 in Sicily, and in September of 43 in mainland Italy. So by the time the invasion happened, we'd been at war for a long time. And obviously the invasion was the biggest thing that had happened to date. It's huge. And of course, last week had Memorial Day, originally called Decoration Day. Started after the American Civil War to honor both Union and Confederate soldiers who died while serving in the armed forces. Very special day. Unfortunately, for many, it's simply a day of barbecues, yard sales, mattress sales. Come to think of it, mattresses never on sale. So that's all I have about World War II. But we'll tell us what's coming up. Charlie Lloyd, our resident headhunter, will tell you what he's got scheduled to come up, and we'll introduce our speaker for tonight's program. Charlie? I like the shortened version of this. It used to be pretty long. Compress it so
Good news that I forgot to leave the last one for the speaker. Oh. So you're on top of it. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. A nice crowd. We have a very interesting interview here tonight. I'm anxious to introduce you. Let's make it brief, because you said don't make a big flowery introduction, right, Colonel? Keep it up here so you can hear me now. Good thing I got hearing aids, so now I can hear myself. Just a few points of interest. I'd like to name the planes you flew. PT-17 Stearman, correct me if I'm wrong. P-19 Fairchild, P-36 Hawk, P-40 Warhawk, a P-47 Thunderbolt, a P-57 Mustang, P-51 Mustang, and a T-33 Shooting Star, that was a trainer, T-33, and an F-86 Sabre. So he has quite a background. Says here you have your family going back to England as far back as 1410. Your genealogy. It's amazing. Mine goes back to 1700, but half of them are horse thieves, and I stopped over there. And they were Welsh. And I'm going to skip here because I'm going to let you do your talking, but there's a note I have in the back. I got 2 pieces of paper. I don't want 2. Make it one occur. Here's something. It's going to start reading off. On your 65th birthday, you went skydiving. And I think you did on your 95th, you did a barrel roll or something. Here's the last thing I'm going to mention, I think is important. There's 4 children. One of them here is David. There's 9 grandchildren. 15 great-grandchildren. And 3 great-great-grandchildren. That's quite a legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Bob Brocklehurst.
Are we on? We're on. Well, President Gibson, members of the World War II Roundtable, fellow veterans, I salute you for your service, glad you're here, and guests. Unless you're 76 years old, my stories will be before you were born. They take place in 1941, 42, and 43. You veterans have a lot of story to tell, and I hope you tell them. I hope you find mine interesting tonight. In February 1941, I will be talking about pilots in 41, 42, and 43, along with some of my career. In February 1941, some 1,500 young men, ages 20 to 27, joined the Army Air Corps as flying cadets. We were sent to a number of flying schools, primary flying schools, throughout the United States. When we got there, they said, look around, because when you finish your training in 7.5 months, 1/3 of you will be gone. We flew single-engine PT-17s and PT-19s, ground school, most of the time, real hastened by upperclassmen that would put you in a brace, eyes on a point, say, mister, your shoestrings are not tied even. Are you a sloppy dresser, or your belt buckle isn't lined up correctly? You're a sloppy dresser in some things along that line. And if you took your eyes off that point and looked down, mister, did I tell you to look down? What'd you do that for? You're real sloppy, aren't you? And things like that. And some people couldn't take it. At night they would give us come into barracks when we were studying and turn the lights out and stay air raid. And if you weren't under a stack of bunks, you were a casualty. They'd pull you out, make you pray over them, and they do that like maybe once or twice a night, interfere with your studies. After 70 hours of flying primary, we went on to basic flying school, where we flew BT-9s, a little more advanced airplane, BT-13s, another 70 hours, and then those that were left, got washed out, went to 8 different flying schools. They were all called 41G was our class. We graduated on September the 26th, 1941, and were assigned to fighters, bombers, and transports. A few of them were retained for instructors. In our old class, and I was at Kelly Field, Texas for advance, we had a fellow named Phil Bacon. We had a Dunn, I forget Dunn's first name, and a Dennis Crisp. And they were teaching us to be officers and gentlemen. We had these reception lines to go through and meet the adjutant and other colonels and things on the base. And the base, when we got to our first base, we'd always line up. We'd go first, I'm Bacon, I'm Dunn, I'm Chris. By that time, the line, we realized all of us, and they were all laughing about this. When Brocklehurst came through, nobody ever remembered me. We graduated 991 out of the 1,500 who started. We lost about 251 during the war years, about a third of the class. My orders, the youngest now is 97, be 98 this year, most of them, and the oldest will be 101 this year. There's 14 of us left. We had an annual reunion starting in about 1954. We had an annual reunion, and we had our 75th reunion 2 years ago. And that's how we kept track of each other. I was assigned, I got my orders to Selfridge Field, Michigan, north of Detroit. Went up there to P-40s. P-40 was the hottest airplane at that time. We'd seen some land in flying schools. They would get way off, coming fast, low, put the front two wheels on the runway, brake to stop at the far end of the runway. Some of them in the dust would even catch the propeller and ruin the propeller. We would go, oh, oh. And then I get my orders, I'm going to Selfridge Field, Michigan, to a P-40 outfit. The squadron commander was Jack Chenault, one of the 7 sons of General Claire Chenault, the Chinese fame. He had a meeting with everybody. He said, fellas, the P-40 is an airplane. There's 2 wheels up front and a tail wheel behind. You have to stall that airplane, which means you quit flying when you stall. And you'll land on all 3 wheels. None of this 2-wheeled stuff screaming to stop. And he insisted on that. He personally checked this out, and that saved a number of lives. That difference in flying under Jack Chenault. People occasionally ask me, were you ever scared in an airplane? And I tell them, well, yes. I was scared twice in the same day, sir. I was scared twice in the same day, but the rest of the time I was only frightened. During flying school, all the airplanes had what they called propeller fatigue. They did not do any acrobatics. They demonstrated 1 or 2 with us. I get up to Selfridge Field, I got about 6 or 7 hours in this P-40, and I was sent up on an acrobatic mission. Well, I got up to about 10,000 feet, and I honestly wasn't sure I wanted to get that P-40 upside down or not. So I thought, well, we did some snap rolls before, to cross control, where you cross control an airplane, it snaps around, you catch it when it's right side up, and go on flying. So I got up my nerve, I tried that snap roll. That airplane went every which way. Although I'm strapped in tight, I was bouncing on the cockpit. I would have bailed out if I could. I couldn't reach anything to bail out. Didn't know what I was going to do. At 5,000 feet, that airplane came straight and level, purred along like a kitten. Well, I got controls, climbed back up to 10,000 feet, and I got unscared the first time. Well, I better try it again, so I tried another one. Same thing happened. Went off through all sort of gyrating. Honestly, I would have bailed out again. I couldn't reach any controls to bail out. Now, it may sound silly, you're strapped in tight, but you'd be surprised how loose you'd be flying around. 5,000 feet, that airplane came flying straight and level, purring like a kitten, and I took control. I circled around a little bit, and I went back to the field and put that thing on the ground. That's my scared the second time. Red Reinerson, a classmate of mine, did the same thing the following day, only he bailed out. On December the 7th, we had Pearl Harbor. I was flying a simulated combat mission in Stearman's on a Sunday. Came back to the field to land. The airplanes were spotted all over the field. You couldn't land. We had to buzz the tower, and they recognized us, cleared some airplanes out, and land. That's when we learned about Pearl Harbor. A week later on Saturday, we were the 2nd squadron of the 52nd group at that time. Fighter squadron has 24 airplanes, about 27 pilots counting the squadron commander and the operations officer, and around 600 to 700 enlisted men and officers, depending on where you were stationed in the facilities there. On that Saturday, following Saturday, we went on a troop train headed for California, Sacramento. We picked up P-40s from the depot, and they were coming available by 1s and 2s and 3s. The senior officers must have drawn it in everybody's name, and when your turn came, that was your turn to fly. Well, the senior officers had gone, and 3 of them came available about the same day. So Red Reinerson and Roderick, another classmate, and myself took off. 2 of them in formation. I was tail end Charlie, and I kept drifting back behind them. And we had the mountains on each side, some overcast clouds around. I had about 15 hours on P-40, then as much as anybody, and I found my friction control wasn't holding. These are things that happened to me that maybe gave me an edge later on. But anyway, I lost them in the clouds. I got on the beam, worked out a beam problem, made a letdown, but it was a false cone of silence on the beam, which doesn't mean much. But I break out of the clouds, and I don't see any airfield, just a small town. Spied a small Cub airport. I knew that couldn't be the one I wanted, but I landed there anyway. The other 2 fields landed in a cornfield. And the next day, a senior second lieutenant came out, took the ammunition, my baggage out of my airplane, flew it back, and let me take off on this short runway, and also took the 2 airplanes out of the field from the other 2 guys. We started with 24 airplanes. By the time we got to Alaska, we lost 6 airplanes on the way up, 1 airplane and 1 pilot in Alaska. We flew most of the route without any navigation aids. We had a hand-drawn map about this size that airline pilots had made, and that's what we used. We landed on the wrong side of snow-covered runways. It lengthened the runways. There was snow-covered stumps, and we landed among the stumps, and that's how we lost our 6 airplanes on the way up. Check back here and see where I am. I got to Portland, Oregon, got up with a couple other airplanes there. We took off for Spokane, Washington, and I'm going along, and suddenly my feet are sliding. I look down, you're in you got a bottom tray there, about a 1/4-inch lip on it, where you got your rudder pedals and 2 gas gauges in the bottom, about that high up on the floor. They were covered with oil. My engine was running all right, but it leaked through and went back through in my E4 bag, kind of spoiled my luggage. But I kept on flying, landed all right. At Portland, they filled a long tube to the top where oil wasn't supposed to. The oil got heated, and leaked out all over the airplane. But then from Spokane, Washington, where we took off in a flight, headed for Edmonton, my belly tank wouldn't feed. You needed that belly tank with 50 gallons of fuel in it. So I landed, they all landed in Calgary. On Calgary, a left tire had blown in the air. The RCAF was there. The RAF was there, training RCAF pilots. And they said, yeah, you made a perfect landing. No, the tire had to be flat in the air. So I spent 2 weeks with those people to get parts in and fly. And then I was on myself going up to Edmonton. And I'm just telling all these, that's how it was at that time. And they found snowstorms all around. Finally found out I was heading in the wrong direction due to a iron deposit in the mountains at low altitude with turn your compass off 90 degrees. So I worked that out, went to Edmonton and landed, and one of our classmates was there, and they were just closing the field. He was closing the hangar door when he seen me coming in. But I made out in those three things. When we got up to Alaska, I landed on March the 5th, 1942, finally at Fairbanks, Alaska. I landed the airplane. We had the flying suits on. I carried a .45 pistol on one hip, a long-range Colt Woodsman pistol on the other, and I got out and I started shooting Alaska mosquitoes. You can tell Alaska mosquito because they got a white spot between their eyes about the size of a man's fist. Yeah, I stretched that a little bit. We were the 11th Fighter Squadron going up there. There was a P-36 squadron. The old P-36 had a 230 caliber machine guns firing through the propeller. And we, in our P-40s, we had 350 caliber machine guns in each wing. Flew with Jack Chenault a number of times, and he would fly through these mountain passes, overcast. We couldn't turn around and go back, and we would follow Jack anywhere. He was a great guy. They call him Jack. He was a first lieutenant, got promoted to captain then. And we come down in the back of the land. He said, fellas, I know you got to fly in close, but would you please stop trying to get in the cockpit with me when we're flying? And you close right up on him, wanted to be on his wing. He also liked to play volleyball. We always had a volleyball court set up near our alert center on down through the Aleutian Change. We'd be playing volleyball out there with our May West on alert, and we get a scramble, and Jack would shake his head and say, doggone it, when flying interferes with volleyball, we got to stop flying. The 18th was up there with the P-36s, had senior second lieutenants in it, and they decided to transfer half of the 11th over to the 18th, and half of the 18th over to the 11th, and take their airplanes with them. Well, I went to the 18th, took my P-40 with me, got over there, and then the senior second lieutenants in the 18th took my P-40 away and gave me a P-36. So we flew a mixed squadron of P-40s and P-36s for a while. And when we get out in maneuvers and stuff, the P-40 with the streamline would go like that, and you're like backing up with that radial engine in the P-36. And finally, we all got P-40s. We flew out there in training, and our squadron, the 18th, moved to Kodiak Island. There's a man here who was on Kodiak Island at that time, came down here tonight, and we had some P-36s then, and some P-40s. They had installed a new radar, and this gentleman may have helped install it, and they wanted us to test it. And we took off in 6 P-46s. I was the last man. We went out low in the water over the Pacific and made a 90-degree turn and started to climb. We just climbed straight ahead for a while. Then we started to circle. And it was difficult for me to fly. I don't know why. I always trim my airplane off to fly. As you change altitude, you trim it so it will fly almost hands-on, not quite, but you compensate for the thinness of the air. And the last thing I remembered was, while we're circling, if I keep in the sun in my eyes, I will be all right. And I was at 21,000 feet. The next thing I knew, I woke up, my ears were hurting. Oh, the oxygen tube at that time was like an enema tube, about yay long, had holes in it. You put it in your mouth and you sucked on it, and probably I wasn't doing it right, not getting enough oxygen. But I was at 5,000 feet in a gentle bank. I'd come from 21,000 feet to 5,000 feet. They figured that if you take the minimum amount, I put come down at 200 to 250 feet a minute maybe. I was unconscious for over an hour in that airplane while it descended from 21,000 to 5,000 feet. The airplanes had canceled the mission, went down, searched for me, gone back and landed, debriefed, had something to eat, refueled, we're heading off the airplane. When I got back to land, and I couldn't find the ground, I made 3 or 4 passes at the field. Yeah, let's see. But you might have installed that radar up there. We did a good job of testing it. We then leapfrogged from Kodiak to Cold Bay. It's about from the southwest corner of Alaska proper. You have a peninsula that goes out to the southwest, and then the Aleutian Islands start. It's 1,500 miles from that corner of Alaska, called Neck or King Salmon, out to that too on the far end. So it's a long ways. We leapfrogged, from Kodiak, we went down to Cold Bay, which is at the end of that peninsula, and we operated there until with the 18th Squadron. The 11th Squadron then later leapfrogged over us and went down to Umnak Island. Now you can read different statistics in any account of the war. The Army Air Corps said we lost 24,000 airplanes in combat. We lost 16,000 in accidents. So we had a kill ratio of 1.5 enemy to 1 accident or lost airplane. In Alaska, one source says we lost 45 airplanes to combat and 185 due to weather and accidents. That 4-to-1 ratio of loss and accidents to combat kills. The weather there is 250 days of rain, snow, fog, and high winds. Mean temperatures runs about 38 degrees, anywhere from about 0 up to about 70 degrees. We were at Cold Bay, the 18th was down in Umnak, and there was some, we flew patrols, we did scrambles, never caught anything, lots of clouds for enemy to hide in, and there was a big push coming in. They thought of the Japanese. And now we had the 54th Squadron with P-38s there. I was now done, we were on Umnak. We were at Cold Bay, and a Canadian squadron was there. They sent 4 P-38s down to reinforce Umnak, further down the chain. 3 of them in the mountain were killed, 1 turned around and came back. They sent 4 more P-38s down. They turned around and came back. They sent 7 Canadian P-40s down. 5 of them were lost, and 2 came back. And they came to our squadron, and so we got to get reinforcements down there, and we get volunteers. My commander, Gale, volunteered. My element leader, Little Biggs, volunteered, and I volunteered. And we got 6 airplanes down there. During the time I was there, I had first-hand knowledge of about 100 airplanes lost to weather and accidents during that time frame. Again, I was at the 18th at Cold Bay, the 11th was down at Umnak. Elmer E. Booth from the 18th, myself from the 18th, and then Jake Dixon from the 11th got orders to go back to Anchorage and start a new group. That's from the States. We checked them out in P-40s. Jake Dixon was operations officer. I was A Flight Commander. Jake had applied for reconnaissance training. That came through. He came back to the States. I became operations officer, which is the second in command. And Elmer Booth, who'd been over there for more than 2 years, got transferred to the States, and I became the squadron commander. We moved down to Umnak. Then, in the meantime, the 11th and the 18th had moved to Amchitka. And if you recall, the Japanese in June of '42 had landed, had bombed Dutch Harbor, and then landed on Kiska and Attu. Nothing was done until later in time. We didn't have the airplane. We didn't have the airfields out there. There was no place to land past Umnak. And then then Atka opened as a refueling station. Adak, on further down, was where the command headquarters was. They had an airfield there. And then they opened up Amchitka, which is still further west, not too far from Kiska. And they moved the 18th and the 11th, then went into Amchitka. I would have been there with the 11th. And then the P-38s had the 54th Squadron. We had 2 Canadian P-40 squadrons and some bomber aircraft, all at Amchitka. We got orders in May of '43 to move my squadron to add 2, as many aircraft as we could get in there, and put the rest on Shemya, I don't know, 80 miles maybe east of that too. So we prepared. I took out of my 24 pilots, I picked up my 11 best pilots and myself, and we took off in June for Adak as our staging base. And we landed at Atka for refueling and lunch. We were as I started to land, and you'd have to understand, this one comes, but those snowstorms, rainstorms, could just like that, if you snap your finger, they come down off the one. The mountains are about 2,000 to 3,000, 3,500 feet, and they were generally snow covered. Not all the time, but generally snow covered. And they suddenly would change, and on the Bering Sea in the north, there were clouds, particularly on the south side, and they would just move down, just like that. You could be landing, and the snowstorm would blow in, and you couldn't see the land, or a rainstorm. Well, got my 12 airplanes, and I'm about 300 feet and ready to land in the air. And I see the snowstorm break off of the mountain far end. There was a big wide bay to the right. Weather was generally clear. Bering Sea area was open, big wide area to it. So I yelled, Brocklehurst going around, went on instruments, made the 45-degree turn, and I hoped some of my guys would land. Well, I turned out, got out in the clear area, and my airplanes started popping out one by one. And I got 11 airplanes, missing one. We flew around for 30 or 40 minutes until the snowstorm moved off. We were inside the airfield, moved in. There was a P-40 on the ground that happened to be my wingman. He decided to go ahead and land, but he was climbing into his airplane to take off. I had a tight rule. You will not break formation under any circumstances. And it was a good rule because it really meant for the safety of the flight, really, if you broke formation. But at that, I wish they'd all, as many as possible, could have landed. Went into a long plaza hut, probably as far from here to the back door. And we're sitting there having lunch, and I noticed a group of officers at the far end eating. And I'm about halfway through my lunch, and one of them got up, a big, tall, older person, and then 2 other officers flanking. They come up to us and they said, "Who was leading that flight?" I said, "P-40 that just came here." "I was, sir." I said, "Well, don't you know you're supposed to follow a C-47 when you fly down this chain?" I said, "No, sir. Never followed a C-47. He said, "Well, you don't read your bulletin board to do your mail, do you?" I said, "Yes, sir, I read it all the time." And he said, "Well, a letter went out over a year ago saying when you fly up and down this chain, you must be followed a C-47 to lead you." I said, "Sir, I've never seen such a letter." I said, "I've scrambled in all types of weather." I said, "I've taken 24 airplanes off under a 300-foot ceiling, climbed through the overcast. And we went out over the Pacific for an hour and a half, and had the mission dismissed or canceled, flew back to land on the mountain top. I knew, and let down through the overcast under 300-foot ceiling, and safely landed with my 24 airplanes. There weren't any C-47s around then. He says, "Who's your squadron commander?" "I am Sir Captain Brocklehurst. I got a twin-engine airplane out there. We're going to take off about 30, 40 minutes. You finish eating, you get on our wing, and follow us down to ADAC. That's where the headquarters was, and that's where we were to stage from." So we did. We got down there, and the next day, one of the staff officers who'd been with him come to me and said, "You were right. That letter never went out." The next day he came back and he had a letter with a telegram. I looked at it, "I'm fired. Lost my squadron." And he said, "Okay." So I opened it, got promoted to major. I lost track of my time here, fellas. Well, at 2, found out they only had parked these places for 6 airplanes. Instead of a 3,500-foot runway, which is really our minimums, they had 2,800 feet. The south end was at the North Pacific with a bunch of rocks at the end, about 50 feet off the water, and the northern end, about 2,800 feet there, ended in about 2 feet, a 30-foot deep hole where they dug out about an acre of ground to muskeg. And I said, "Yeah?" I said, "I think our guys can hack it." So out of my 12, then I had to pick 6 airplanes. Now, they're my best 24 pilots, and I have 2 on a C-47. We found the C-47 then. And they didn't want the Air Force units at Amchitka or the Japanese at Kiska to know we were putting airplanes in the Act 2, where our Army had landed on May the 5th. This is June now, and we're fighting the Japanese. So they hauled that C-47, climbed up through an overcast, got on top, good visibility, clear sky, and the airplane goes out northwest, low, right on top of the now undercast to us. And nothing in sight except that. We got out where we were north of Ad 2, and they turned south to Ad 2. That would get bypassed all the other radar, and everything socked in. You could finally see the mountain top on Ad 2. I don't know, they were not over 5,000 feet high, those mountains down the chain, some only 2,000, 3,000 feet, but all socked in. Well, we didn't have enough fuel to go back, so I figured we'd have it. But we kept following that C-47. Well, we got down to Ad 2, and they're in the south side with a great big 3 or 4 mile hole, blue sky, everything. The overcast had broken apart. And so we landed the C-47, let the service crews out, and we landed, and I think 2 of my 6 airplanes used everything but about 1 foot of that clear steel plank runway. Of the 8 pilots they took down there, a year later, 5 of them were dead. Let's see, I gotta catch up on my notes here or something. Of the 6 pilots they took down there, one was a Peter B. Provenzano. He had been with the American squadron over in England fighting the Germans. When we got in the war, he came back to our squadron, was up to, assigned to my outfit. Pete was one of the nicest peacemaking guys. Now we had problems, but he was just a sort of lovable guy. You couldn't help but love him. And he was my deputy commander. And when we came back to the States, Richmond, Virginia, flying P-47s. We always flew two-ship formations. The wingman at either side, he could maneuver anywhere you wanted. And the instructor down there put him into three-ship formations with the guy back from Iceland on one wing and Pete on the other wing. They did a cross-country and P-47s made a turn, and the guy from Iceland forgot they were flying three ships, crossed over, ran into Pete, killed him. Killed both of them. Jack T. Ingman, he was the older, worldly type guy, knew all about poker and women and everything else, you know, that type of guy. He got transferred back, was shot down in Claims over here. Norman Johnson, he was a Mormon boy from Vernal, Utah. As nice a young man as you would want to see. And he got back, got transferred to Europe, and was shot down, seen the belly of his airplane in, get out of the airplane and run into the woods. The last he was heard from. Henry J.I. Hacker was a son of a very famous Long Island doctor, and he was still on that too, and after I left, and he said, I'm tired of chasing these bogies. That's all we do. We chase them, they disappear in clouds, or their mission canceled because they lose them or what. So I never got to see a Japanese airplane, never got to pirate one, and I don't think any ever fired me. But he said, I'm not going back till I catch one. And he never came back from that mission out of that too. The other one was Gough, my roommate, C-O-U-G-H. He was so short, I don't know how he ever got in the Air Force. He looked like a teenager in college, in high school. He grew a mustache to make himself look older. And because and I always took the junior guy on my wing, and because he was on my wing, he thought he was in second in command of the squadron, which was all right. He followed me everywhere. And he was on a scramble out of Shemya, and Norman Johnson was leading it, and they took off early. It was just starting to get light. Ran into a fog bank. Gough was a wingman. Probably wasn't paying enough attention. Probably looking at his instruments or doing something. Anyway, they ran into the fog bank. He spun in and was killed. He was the only man I lost any time I commanded his squadron. Okay, here's just some experiences of my 41G classmate. Frank Howes was a good friend from Michigan. He got married at the base chapel on September the 26th. I went home and got married October the 11th. Our wives had met. We both left our wives pregnant when we went overseas right away. Frank went to Africa flying P-40s. At that time, the P-40s were told you make one pass and keep going. You cannot outfight the German fighters. And Frank was heard to say, the next mission I'm going to stay and fight. I'm tired of running away. He never came back and never got to see his baby. Cecil Petty was flying a C-47 in the Pacific. He had 20 Marines aboard. They had to land in the water. He spied an atoll and was able to sit down, and the airplane did settle on this atoll. But they had to put 10 Marines out on each wing to keep it balanced there for about 24 hours until they got picked up. Jerry Dixie was on an aircraft carrier Langley with about a dozen other 41G pilots. The P-40s were in the hold, and they were on their way to Australia. They were sunk by a Japanese submarine. Only 3 or 4 of them, of the 41G guys, were picked up by a destroyer. That too was sunk by a Japanese submarine. And Jerry Dix was the only one picked up and saved. He flew in P-39s in New Guinea, and later was transferred to Europe, where he was shot down with a POW the rest of the war. And Jerry Dix would come to our reunions afterwards. Glenn T. Reinerson, I mentioned him bailing out of the airplane itself, was killed the day after I almost did. And he was one of the ones that landed in the hayfield. He was in Oscoda, Michigan, north of Detroit, flying a T-33, and this guy in the backseat used to be in my outfit too, a captain, and I couldn't even think of his name. He had a funny mustache, and we called him Brush Mush. And they were taking off in his T-33, towing a target for other fighters to shoot at live ammunition at, running a flock of birds, right at takeoff. Both spun in and were killed. Burl Glass had a T-38 outfit in Europe. One of their things was dive bombing, and you had to, and the fighters, the way you dive bombed, if this was a target, you come up to a certain altitude, made a dive. You said, well, I think it's time to drop the bomb. You reached down, you got a T-handle, and pulled it up, and hoped you hit the target. And dropping 500-pound bombs, you had to make sure that the airplane was far enough behind, because when the guy had his bomb went off, he'd catch you too. And one of his wingmen got too close, and the leader's bomb took him out also. On D-Day, they lost 1/4 of their squadron in combat. Burl was coming, nice guy. He was at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, at an air base, and I was opening up KI Saga over in Marquette, Michigan, and we had to get a lot of service from him, so we became good friends. He was coming from Florida to a class reunion in San Antonio, and stopped for the night somewhere on New Orleans or someplace, and got up and he was hurting. I find out that a brown recluse spider had bitten him in the arm, and he later, about 3 weeks later, died from it. Bill Bacon was up in the Aleutians. He had stayed at the 11th when I was transferred to the 18th. In fact, when we got through the Almanac reinforced that time, I stayed at Phil's tent. Phil had a P-47 group, and when Patton was making his run towards Berlin, he said, Air Force, he said, I'll take care of my front. I can take care of my left flank. But you, Air Force, you got to take care of my right flank. Well, Phil's group of P-47s was assigned that job, and Phil did such a good job of it that when Patton's army liberated a cognac factory, General Patton had that truck loaded with cognac and sent it over to Phil's group as a gift. True story. Everything, the names are real, everything on my story. Doug Canning was flying P-38s out of New Guinea. At that time, our intelligence had broken the Japanese code. If you watched the Battle of Midway, some of you've seen that reenactment of breaking that Japanese code. So they knew when Admiral Yamamoto of the Japanese Navy was going to fly down to the South Pacific. And they set it up, and the P-38s went up and shot him down. And Doug was in that play. Last story, Charlie O'Sullivan. Charlie O'Sullivan was flying P-38s in New Guinea. He got shot up and had to bail out. He landed in a heavy forest. Knew the coast was pretty rugged down below. So he said, there's no point in going to the coast. So he started walking kind of parallel, didn't know what to do, and he came to a stream. On the other side of the stream, he spied a native couple. They had just killed a wild boar. He noted that the woman, the man and woman, took a piece of bamboo out of her pack and took the end of it off, and they slit the boar's throat and filled it with the boar's blood. They plucked it up, got all set, ready to go and start up the hill. At that time, he made himself known to them, and they just kind of shook their heads at him. As he started following his side of the stream. They tried to stop him. He wasn't going to leave him. So he followed them to their village, was up higher on sort of a plateau. He was there a few days, and he realized they were cannibals. He realized they were fattening him up to eat. So they had a big meeting hut there. And behind it was a small hut. They'd go in there for meetings. Well, this one day, Sully kind of figured that maybe this is the day they were going to kill him. So he got in early, sat with his back to the opening to the small hut behind, and he wouldn't let anybody get behind him. So the place filled up. They talked for a couple hours. It got dark. Then he seen a man come in the door with a bigger bamboo tube. And he knew that was for his life. So he pulled down his .45 pistol and kept it in his lap. It was fairly dark in there, a little bit of light. And so the man tried to get behind him, and he wouldn't let him get behind him through the other door. And then another man grabbed his left arm, and he pulled up his .45 and shot him. And he got up and he ran, and the guy blocked the door, and he shot him. Ran out outside, and went to the edge. Pitch dark now, and he said there was maybe a couple of feet elevation on this plateau with deep grass. So he just went over the edge and laid in that deep grass. Well, they looked and decided they couldn't find him. He stayed there until it began to get daylight, and he got up and left. They searched for him for about 3 weeks. One day he was out in a more open area, and he seen him coming through the area, and he hid behind a bush. And he thought, oh, they're going to find him. So he took his shoes off, put them down behind a bush, intended to pick them up and run, but he wouldn't be breaking any twigs. Maybe he could do better than climbing. And when they weren't looking, he got up and ran and forgot his shoes. He eventually decided to go down to the coast. He found about a 27-man Australian reconnaissance team down there. And they said, well, we don't know what to do with you, but we can take you out to a friendly native village. So he said, no, I had full of natives. I couldn't go to any native village. He said, well, you can go on patrol with us, but it could be hazardous. Well, he said, I'll go on patrol with you. Well, they went on patrol, and they found a small army detachment at a real small base, so they took him there and left him. There happened to be a messenger plane in there like a Piper Cub with a Lieutenant Frederick flying it. And he said, well, I'll take you back to your base. And he said, my engine's been giving me problems. He said, no, I think we can make it. Charlie says, let's go. So they got in the airplane. They got about 20 minutes out. The airplane got up. They turned around to come back, and the airplane quit. So they crashed landed upside down in some trees, weren't hurt. Got down to the ground safely and walked back to the camp. And later on, they sent a C-47 in to pick him up. Now, at that time, the Australians had a deal. If you were killed, they would auction off all your equipment and send the money to the family. Well, I guess the Air Force had kind of picked up the rule and done the same thing. So when he landed back at his own base, he'd lost 40 pounds. And one guy come up and said, hey, Charlie, I got your camera, I'll give it back to you. Another one says, hey, Charlie, I got your shaving kit, I'll give it back to you. At that time, his squadron had shot down over 100 Japanese aircraft. There was a documentary made on the basis that was going to make a full film on it. Charlie O'Sullivan showed this document at a 41Z reunion. They'd gone back to New Guinea, they found the wreckage of his airplane, and he was traveling talking, and some of the local natives come up to a meeting they had and said, do not go back up to where you were, said they will kill you the minute they can find you for what you did. And one of them come up and says, I found your shoes behind the bush. He said, I still have them. I have a copy of that disc, and somehow I got misplaced. I'd like to conclude by reading a poem written by Harold Moen of Myerstown. Harold is 101 years old. He's well known internationally and by our government heads. He has been honored by almost every head of state connected with cemeteries and where the dead of World War II are buried. He's dedicated them with poems and things, a great guy. He allowed me to change a word or two in this poem, Harold Moen, M-O-H-N. They rest in honored glory at home and o'er the sea, and deep within our hearts and minds. They live in memory. They gave their utmost and their all to keep our country free and to protect our cherished right of hallowed liberty. They find their just and lasting peace with God who reigns above. And now, upon a memory day, we affirm our lasting love. They only ask that we strive on with all our might and main to keep our country safe and free, so their service was not in vain. Then, as the haunting notes of taps so softly fade away, we say a fond and sad farewell on this, a Remembrance Day. Thank you for attending.
Questions
about your maintenance that you had in Alaska and the type of environment you were under.
What was the question?
He's asking about your experience with maintenance on the aircraft in Alaska because he retired as maintenance.
Okay, good question. I'm glad you asked that one. We had the best enlisted crews that you could have. They were old timers. Our line chief was a baby E. Schultz. Now, to me, he was an old man. He used a cane. Officers said, sir, to him. And he'd say, you don't say sir to me. He said, I'm an enlisted man. They'd say, yes, sir. Baby Schultz, all he had to do was say, this has got to be done. Maybe he'd wave that cane and say, get her done. And it got done. Our crews were just tremendous. I can't say enough for them, and I've given them credit every time it came up. When we were on alert to scramble, we'd be having our May West on all ready to go. When you get out to your airplane, there'd be 3 airmen there. There'd be one on each side of the cockpit on the wing, and one below. You put a foot up on the wing, and the guy on the left side of the cockpit would put his hand down. You'd get his hand, step up on the wing, and the guy behind him would give you a push in the fanny and lift you up there. They would help you get in the cockpit. The guy on each side would have your shoulder strapped to your parachute all wide open. You'd sit down there with a toggle switch about this wide, about this long on the floor, on the cockpit floor. And you kick that with your toe to start the energizer. And they would hand you your straps, you'd have to fasten them, and they'd grab your leg straps, hand them to you, you had to fasten them, and they'd hand you your seatbelt, and you had to fasten them, and then they would go and slap you on the shoulder, get off and yell clear. About that time, your energizer was all worked up, you could yell clear back and start the engine, and just 2 or 3 minutes, you're running the engine ready to take off. But we had the most excellent crews. Our airplanes were always maintained, ready to go. We never had to have a hangar queen of an airplane, and these guys were good. I take my hat off to them. Thank you for the question.
Bob, I have a question. Bob and I are friends, full disclosure. You had, based on what we heard tonight, you have a wonderful past, and you make us all proud for the service that you've given to our country, dating all the way back to World War II. But you also have a future. On June 26th, you're going to do something special, and I think our audience would love to hear what your plans are for June 26th.
David?
He's asking about the plans for June 26th there in Myerstown.
Okay. Last year ago, February, I was in Florida, and they surprised me. I went out to the executive airfield in Tampa, got aboard a P-51 that I hadn't flown in some 65, 70 years. Took off, two-seater 51, and they let me fly for 30 minutes doing all the acrobatics I used to do in fighters. I loved acrobatics. I just used to be upside down in an airplane as I would standing here sitting down. I didn't know it, but we flew from Tampa down to Venus, and the radio station was there to interview me, and then it got picked up by another radio station, interviewed me, and it got all over the United States. Australia was picked up, and in England. And since then, people have been picking it up on YouTube. Bob Brocklehurst will get you the whole flight. But as a result of that, Myerstown is having its 250th reunion on anniversary commemorative on August the 25th. On June the 26th, they've arranged for a light acrobatic aircraft at Lancaster. I'm to fly it and do all the acrobatics I did in fighters, and they're going to film it from the ground. They're going to film it from inside the cockpits, and they're going to show it on the 25th of August at the reunion ceremony. They do this June the 26th, so we make sure the weather's good and can get it done ahead of time.
Wow, is the public invited to see that?
Is what?
The public is invited to
Oh, yeah.
the
Public
page
invited over there.
Myerstown, not
There's going to be
the
a dancing and wine tasting and a little beer garden and music, and on Sunday there'll be
That'll be on August 25th in Myerstown. The flight on June 26th, Bob will take off from the Lancaster Airport. I'm involved in this project with him. And he will fly stunts over an FAA-approved area over the Keller Airport in Schaeferstown, and then come back and land. And we're going to have television stations cover that, and we're going to make Bob a rock star at age 96.
Another question? Oh, lots of questions. While I'm walking, what was your favorite aircraft?
While I get done, I'm going to say that I will probably do some warm-ups with some half rolls, like you go around like this, sharp turn to get the feel of it, and then I'll probably do some rolls, probably do some barrel rolls where you have positive G's to do a slow 8-point roll. I'm not too sure I can do that real carefully anymore and hold that, but I will probably, in fighter jet, get up to 300 miles an hour, come up with the stick back in your belly, so you round out. When you're up at the top, you got to look back and find the horizon. So as you come around, you do a perfect vertical circle. And then if you do another one, you've got to start at 300 miles an hour. You come up, once you get back upside down and start down, then you roll right side up. That's called an Immelman, and you can keep going straight, or you can go to another dive and come up, then you go straight up until the airplane says, I'm not going to fly anymore. You pick a rudder and come straight down and do a roll. And those are some of the things I will be doing. What was what?
Your favorite aircraft to fly?
Well, it depends if you want work or pleasure. The P-51 was probably the pleasure, and the P-47 was probably for work. I flew every fighter there was except the P-43. I was first pilot in 18 different types of aircraft. I like to fly, and if I could get my hands on an airplane, I flew. I wanted to do that since I was big enough to know what an airplane was. Yes, sir.
A question on radar. You flew before radar became effective.
Speak up.
When radar came about, did your pilots accept it, or were they dubious about it, especially at nighttime? Did they trust radar at the beginning?
Asking specifically about your experience with the production of radar. You started flying before there was radar, and as radar became available, pilots were supposed to report their reaction to radar.
Well, in those early days, the only radar we had was supposed radar that picked up enemy aircraft. And it was all new to us. We did not have landing radar until maybe 44, with a ground system that would guide you into landing. But we didn't have any, up in Alaska we had no navigating aids whatsoever. Every time you flew, it was up to you to find your way back. That's why we lost 185 airplanes due to the weather. We didn't mind taking off except in the fog. That fog was, you couldn't fly in the fog. Occasionally, yes, we did, but we never got above an overcast unless we could see on the lee side of the mountain. There used to be some type of hole, not much, but you could see up there was blue sky above. And that meant that you could see the mountaintops. And you learn the mountaintops, every one. So if you were up on top of these, you're up on top, it's an undercast, and you're below it's an overcast. And then you find a mountaintop, and you learn them, and you put your back at the mountaintop, and then let down to break out over the water, usually. I'm flying underneath the low ceiling, 300, 400, 500 feet was common flying. I always flew out over the water. If you're flying over the edge of the land, you have to make a turn. There's no horizon over the water at that altitude. You're strictly on instruments all the time, which is maybe not good for everybody in the formation, even for you. So I always flew out over the water, so if I had to make a turn to the fog bank or whatever, I could turn towards the land, and I knew the land was visible because I'd just come up that way. So I could turn towards the land, I had a horizon then, and I could turn. And that's what we did. There was no navigates, no radar to bring us back or anything.
Well, when was the last time you flew as pilot in command?
When's the last time what?
When was the last time you flew as a pilot in command of the aircraft?
Well, I took some time in a light airplane, about 1980, I guess. But outside of that, 1968, before I retired. It was the last time I flew fighters. But it's, you know, you go home and you're going to put the car in the garage or somewhere, hopefully, you don't even realize you did it. And fighters, you train everybody to handle that airplane in any condition so that they can handle it. And that means you look like this, upside down or whatever, about to stall you get the feel of it, so you know what to do to get out of it. Even a touch of a spin, now we didn't go purposely spinning fighters, but and I always taught the guys, if you're going to an unusual maneuver, you don't know what to do, get the stick back in your belly, kick a rudder, and that'll start you into a normal spin, which is maybe not good, but you know how to get out of it. And that's what we did back then. It was a lot different back in 41. You didn't have the facilities, you had limited stuff on your airplane, and up in Alaska, we most often would run out of tachometers. I don't know why. And I would let the younger guys have the tachometers. I would fly behind a seasoned pilot and synchronize my propeller with his when you're cruising out, so I knew that my engine setting and throttle setting was at the best performance, and then I'd pull away and do whatever I had to do. Different game then, than it is now. I have about 1,400 hours jet time, and it's entirely different than flying the propeller airplanes.
That was kind of my question. If you give a few personal reflections on your transfer from piston fighters to jet fighters, and you know how you felt as you transferred from the older pistons to the newer jets.
Talking about your experiences and reactions to changing piston-driven engines for powering aircraft to jets.
Well, there's a lot of difference. Flying is basically the same, but let's take a T-33. You had 800 gallons of fuel, and you used 805. And you set your fuel counter at 800, and then counted backward. It took you 200 gallons to taxi out and take off to altitude, maybe say 27, 30,000 feet or whatever. And you had about 400 gallons to cruise on. And you needed 200 gallons for a penetration when you lived down to 20,000 feet. And then all jet penetration started at 20,000 feet. You come down 5,000 feet a minute. And that can take 100 gallons of gas, maybe more. You wanted to land at least with 125 if you could. Now, if you have weather, you have to go to an alternate, and you had to increase those things to make allowances for it. On jets, your greater speed, you know, you could sometimes be doing 600 miles an hour with a tailwind and stuff, even in the T-33. But you probably hit all your checkpoints within about a minute. And the propeller airplanes, sometimes 3 or 4 minutes off. But the jet flying was different. And you were always flying above 20,000 feet. Anywhere from 20 to 30. The P-47, we get up over 30,000 feet once in a while, but you're kind of limping along like this in the thin air.
I keep forgetting to ask the right question. This is June 7th, one day after D-Day. How will you be on July 17th?
Being one day after D-Day, and a number of years since then, I was asking you to tell how old you're going to be next month on the 17th.
Oh, I'm only 97 until July 17th. Then I'll be a young 98.
98, that's what I'm here.
Thank you, sir.
That was terrific, thank you. Now, no good deed goes unpunished. Therefore, we'd like to have you go home with this highly prized, very valuable, very expensive, Pennsylvania World War II round table mug.
Hey, thank you, sir.